I was pretty much like you. And probably like most people, I thought of course the United States put a man on the moon. Not only once, but how many times again? Yeah, 6 times, and 12 astronauts in total. It's simply beyond debate. And those famous words echo in my mind. One small step for man, a giant leap for mankind. Those tinfoil head nutters who think the Earth is flat, a free perpetual energy is possible, and there is a big conspiracy going on against mankind. And the aliens are here. Those nutcases denying that humanity has put a man to the moon. Oh boy, how can people be so stupid? I was curious to see what those nutcases had to say, so I watched a video about the fake moon landing. Yeah, statements about this and that, declaration about all kinds of ridiculous things. Some people, right? So of course I started looking into the scientific data regarding the Apollo missions. I had to admit that my knowledge was limited in this, but the arguments, especially from the Soviet scientists, regarding the radiation, were convincing. Pretty well argued stuff. Some of it at least. I watched some more videos. Read more articles about space and the physical limitations to human space travel. What? Could it be? Really? Are the tinfoilers right? I simply had to investigate this for myself. I urge you to do the same. And here it is, my investigation into the allegation of the US of A faking the manned mission to the moon. Let me start by saying that there are some pretty compelling arguments for the fake moon landing allegation, and some hard to ignore scientific arguments against NASA putting a man to the moon in the middle of the 20th century. So let's look at some of them. First, why haven't we been there again? Not since 1972? Why on earth not? No pun intended. If the US did send humans to the moon, it would have been logical to continue on that path. And a manned mission to Mars would have been a logical next step, wouldn't it? It's only now, 50 years later, that Elon Musk and friends are speculating on sending people to Mars, and still no people on the moon. Not even on the agenda. Okay, perhaps it was simply not worth the effort. Probably too expensive to send people to the moon, and nothing really to gain from it. So NASA just didn't got the funding to continue, and the tech and the know-how evaporated into oblivion. And then there is the fact that despite all those powerful telescopes, no one has ever seen the moon rover on the moon's surface. No orb, so that we can use to put the matter to rest. I mean, we can see distant galaxies and even the origin of the universe, but not the indisputable proof that humans were on the moon. You mean to tell me that we cannot see on our own satellite, relatively close to Earth, any physical trail from all those manned missions? Well, they say that no lens is big enough to see a few meters-sized object 400,000 kilometers away. It would simply defy the law of optics. Alright, but what about the computer power available at the time? The Apollo moon landing computer had a clock speed of 1.024 MHz. Compare that to the current common smartphone that has around 3 GHz, and you see that the average smartphone today is astronomically faster and more powerful than anything NASA had in the 70s. I mean, surely that kind of archaic technology couldn't possibly have done the job. 1 MHz? It's hardly enough to play the game of Tetris, come on. Okay, they had other kinds of technology, analog stuff, lamp transistors, gears, belts, and who knows what. I mean, I am not going to rule out that they had the technology in 1969 to send a man to the moon, in the middle of the 20th century some 50 years ago. I read somewhere that the GSM technology, you know, the basics for modern smartphone communication, was invented in the Second World War. So I guess it's possible that the tech in the 60s and 70s was sophisticated enough for the job. Hard to believe it though, but who am I to argue? I guess they could have done it, although I'm pretty sure they could not pull it off today, with that technology. An interesting fact to note here is that the invention of live stream satellite technology came about the same time as the first Apollo mission. Pretty convenient to have the technology to show the whole world a live moon landing of man exactly when you need one. And that to coincide with the invention of all the technological solutions needed for this incredibly hard mission. That is simply fabulously lucky. Tinfoil that. Okay, let's move on. The radiation. Now, that is a good one. There is this thing called the Van Allen radiation belt. That is, in short, a magnetic field around Earth, or any planet for that matter. The magnetic field captures radioactive particles, generally from a star like our Sun, and by capturing those particles, creates a shield that then prevents most radiation from reaching a planet's surface. So basically, without the Van Allen radiation belt, no life could exist on Earth. What this practically means is that there is a life-threatening radiation in space we as Earthlings are protected from by this belt. Leaving Earth's atmosphere is therefore life-threatening for two main reasons. First, humans must go through the Van Allen belt, which is essentially a concentration of deadly radiation. Secondly, beyond the belt, living organisms are exposed to deadly radiation from our Sun and galactic cosmic rays. Think about it like this: in space there is deadly radiation from the galaxy and our Sun. Being exposed to that is incredibly hostile to biological systems. This radioactive stuff is then swayed into a concentration around Earth by Earth's magnetic field, where it is even more deadly than in space in general. So, in order to send people to space, a spaceship must provide protection from radiation to keep them alive. On top of that, electronics are also vulnerable to this radiation, so the ship must also shield all the essential electronic equipment on board a spaceship. Seems like a pretty daunting task, right? But I am sure it can be done. Just create a protective shield. You know, like this heavy lead shield we must have on when we get a hospital X-ray taken. So how did NASA pull it off in the 60s? Looking into documents about the Apollo missions are far from convincing, I must say, when it comes to them being able to solve those issues. First, the base of the command module consisted of a heat shield, made of brazed stainless steel honeycomb, filled with a phenolic epoxy resin, as an ablative material, and varied in thickness from 1.8 to 6.9 centimeters. 2 to 7 centimeters? Really? That's it? Is that enough to protect the crew from concentrated deadly radiation of the Van Allen belt and shield the electronics from getting fried? Seriously? NASA states that it was not a problem since the spacecraft passed through the Van Allen belt so quickly. And what can we say? The specialists, the NASA scientists, are so far above the rest of us in knowledge about the matter. Besides, the astronauts also had their space suits on, and that also protected them from radiation, right? So listen to this. On the moon, facing the sun, the heat is about 120 degrees Celsius, 250 Fahrenheit. On the other side we have minus 157 degrees Celsius, that is minus 250 Fahrenheit. Pretty extreme. Water boils at 100 degrees here on Earth. Just imagine stepping into your kitchen oven when baking a pizza. That's how hot it is on the moon's surface. The astronauts stayed on the moon's surface for more than 21 hours, in 120 degrees heat. All in all, the mission took 3 days. Most of that time, the astronauts stayed in a paper-thin module, where the outside temperature is minus 270 degrees Celsius or minus 455 Fahrenheit, before re-entering Earth's atmosphere, where their module had to endure the extreme condition of surviving a heat of some 1,800 degrees Celsius. Pretty robust stuff, the Apollo lunar module. And then we have the micrometeoroids that travel in space at 102,400 kilometers per hour. They will peer right through your body if they hit and can be pretty damaging to a spaceship, not to mention the bigger ones. On top of that, there is the exposure to harmful ultraviolet rays from the sun constantly bombarding you from every direction. So, we cannot go into space, not even for a few seconds, without space suits. And the space suit must be robust, like medieval knight armor on steroids to fulfill the task. I don't know about you, but learning that those Apollo space suits only consisted of thin layers of aluminum foils and fiberglass did not convince me of those suits providing enough protection for a human body to endure in space. I got this eerie feeling that I was looking at early episodes of Star Trek and having to accept them as documents of historical event. So now, you might argue, we see spacewalks regularly in connection with the International Space Station. Surely that is not a hoax. Well, the space station is hovering in what is called low Earth orbit, just 408 kilometers above Earth's surface. This means that the space station is protected by the Van Allen belt, just like the rest of us here on Earth. The Van Allen belt consists of 2 layers, and the lower layer reaches to about 10,000 kilometers above Earth's surface, and there is a second layer above that one. So operating a space station at only 408 kilometers and conducting spacewalks is relatively safe at low orbit, at least compared to walking unprotected on the moon's surface. I must say, this is not looking good for NASA and the Apollo missions. The more I research, the less I am convinced that we actually put a man on the moon. And this is just the beginning, believe it or not. Looking into the surroundings of the Apollo missions gives you a really grim picture indeed. Let's commence by realizing that at the time of the missions, a Cold War was raging between Earth's 2 superpowers, the United States of America and the Soviet Union. We have to bear in mind that immediately following the end of World War II, a deadly race for nuclear power commenced. Not only was there a head-to-head competition of producing nuclear bombs, but also there was the race of being able to deliver those bombs to an enemy target. That meant a rocket race. The 2 superpowers put everything they had into rocket technology. It was vital that they had at least the same capacity to deliver a nuclear bomb with a rocket missile as the opponent. Enter the start of the space race. That race was just as much about the show as the real thing. If you could scare the adversary into thinking you had a certain capacity, it was just as powerful as having the actual capability, since detonating a nuclear bomb was never meant to be realized, simply because that would mean annihilation of all of humanity. Both sides of the Iron Curtain ferociously conducted experiments with rocket launches as a deterrent measure, pretty much like the North Koreans are doing at present. An interesting fact is that both the United States and the Soviet Union swept up all the Nazi scientists that had been working on rocket technology for the Third Reich. After it capitulated, the former Allies gave them immunity, citizenship, and loads of money to keep on developing the rocket technology. This time for the right cause, of course. It is a well-known secret that the bulk of the early US space program was conducted by German scientists, most of whom were members of the Nazi Party, relocated into the United States by a program called Operation Paperclip. The most notorious is Wernher von Braun. Not only was he a member of the Nazi Party in Germany, he was also a member of the SS. So basically, an extreme Nazi. Von Braun became the technical director of the American lunar program in 1961. Is this relevant in this context? Well, it demonstrates at least the willingness of the US government to use any means necessary to get their hands on rocket technology. It shows they were willing to go to any length to gain the upper hand against its former ally and now its adversary, the Soviet Union. The likeness of the acronyms NASA and Nazi is just a coincidence, I am sure. And the fact that the Nazi regime was a master of deception and propaganda is also probably not of any significance here. But just bear that in mind. And yeah, the Soviets did pretty much the same thing. So we should look at the manned missions to the moon in the light of the ferocious rocket tech race between the 2 superpowers. Rockets had numerous applications for those superpowers. It was of vital importance to get communication and surveillance satellites into orbit, besides being able to deliver a deadly blow with atomic warheads. Think about what we did not have if it wasn't for the advance in rocket technology. No global position system, no Hubble telescope, and the weather reports would be even more far off. But on a more serious note, the fact of the matter is that the Soviets were beating the US in the rocket and satellite race. They were the first to get a satellite into orbit, as well as the first to put a man into space. There are significant political strategic implications here. If the Soviets were beating the United States on this ground, could it mean that communism was a better system? Maybe the capital free market democratic system was a failure, and we should all succumb to the Marxist socialist system instead. Please, do not underestimate the significance of this in this context. Is it perceivable that the leaders of the United States, in the midst of a fundamental Cold War, could result in a deceiving game in order to fool the enemy into thinking that they had some capability they had not? Yes, it is very well conceivable. It is done all the time, especially in a war, not the least in a cold one, and surely a justifiable tactic if it ensures survival. But here is the thing. In order to deceive your enemy, you really have to deceive almost everyone else. That means, not only your own citizens, but the rest of the world and almost every single one working on the program. One of the big arguments against the fake moon landing theory is that it would never have been possible, since so many would have been in on it, and surely many would have snitched. I agree. It would be hard to keep something like a fake moon landing a secret. But would it be harder than actually sending a man to the moon? Let's look at it this way. If deceiving your enemy into thinking you have a certain ability and that deception gives you the upper hand and even brings you victory, then of course by all means use the deception instead of the real thing. At least if it is achievable and affordable when the real deal might not be. Regarding the physical obstacles sending a manned mission to the moon and the technology available at the time, I tend to lean towards it being far more probable, the US faking a moon landing, rather than the US being able to actually pull it off. Just think about it for a minute. What is more probable, the United States putting a man on the moon in 1969, or the United States deceiving everybody into thinking they did it? The fact of the matter is that so much about the Apollo missions is shrouded in mystery. I am not going too deep into that. It has been done before, and I urge people to look into some of those interesting researches. They are fascinating, and if nothing else, entertaining to a high degree. Instead, I am going to focus on the question: could they have pulled it off? And would they, if they could? I am convinced that the US had the capacity to deceive the world about landing a man on the moon. And I am convinced they would have done it if it served the purpose of defeating their archenemy, the Soviet Union. And here are my arguments. Let's talk about the images first. Seeing is believing, as they say. And a vital element in any deception is illustrating to people. You do not have to dive deep into the internet to find numerous images and interesting facts about how NASA prepared for the Apollo missions. It is an established fact, for example, that the Nixon administration did film a moon landing in a studio. Why? The film was to be broadcasted if the actual moon landing would fail. It makes sense, of course. It would have been a devastating blow to the US reputation as a society and technological world leader if the Apollo rocket would blow up on a live broadcast seen by almost every human being on Earth. That simply could not happen, no matter what. We now know that the TV coverage of the first moon landing in 1969 relied heavily on fabricated images. This has been officially acknowledged and reported on in conjunction with the 50-year anniversary of the event. Besides, astronaut Buzz Aldrin also did reveal, in an interview on television, that people were not seeing him descending down the stairs of the lunar module in an infamous clip. To quote him, "You watched animation." This is obviously the case, since there was no camera on the moon when they landed to film them descend from the module. And here is a beauty. A CBS live broadcasting of Apollo 11 landing showing the actual landing when there was no camera on the moon. Well, they did not tell anybody at the time about this pre-recorded footage being used to demonstrate a so-called live moon landing. So, undeniably, the facts show that there was a ton of fabricated film material floating around to be used in connection with the Apollo landing, and NASA did indeed use it. That is a fact. Also, we can safely deduct that the motive was to be able to make it look like they possessed technology to send a man to the moon, even if they didn't. The justification, of course, was to deceive the enemy, the Soviet Union. And it has been argued that the space race was one of the big factors in defeating the USSR. In other words, there were factions within the US government ready to deceive a fake moon landing if they had to. And that is a fact. A foul smell is beginning to vapor up regarding this case. And there is more to come. I guess the saying, "Fake it until you make it," is applicable here. Think about the geopolitical strategic benefits from simply appearing superior. It really achieves the same results as actually being superior. By pulling something like a fake moon landing off, a whole lot begins to make sense regarding the Apollo exercise. A political poker face. Deception is a common tactic in any confrontation. Demonstrate a show of strength. Intimidate and hope your opponent does not call you up on it, but lays down his tail in submission to your superiority. Something absolutely logical and is seen in nature all the time. Read between the lines and know your history, and you'll see that intimidating the arch-rival, the Soviet Union, is really what the whole Apollo mission was all about. A demonstration of strength and superiority, basically kicking the Soviet Union in the groin. I already went through some of the physical and technological obstacles regarding a manned moon mission. The fact of the matter is, humanity can't even do it today. So, if that is any indicator, I must lean towards the deception theory being more probable than the other thing. That is, it being a fact that the USA did indeed get a man to the moon in 6 Apollo missions 50 years ago. Now, could the United States government pull off a stunt to deceive the rest of the world into thinking the moon landing actually took place? Let's look at it. Undeniable, the Apollo missions are shrouded in mystery and have been controversial from the outset. Obviously, to pull off a deception on this scale, you would have to obscure everything about it, especially the actual launch and the trip to the moon. So there's already an indicator there. The images and videos are blurry, with large numbers juxtaposed on top of the images, completely unnecessary for the live stream. Except of course to make it look more scientific and to distract from the actual footage. And here is a brainwasher. A lot of the original footage is missing. Can you believe that? Missing. The biggest event in human history. And the original documents are missing. You gotta be joking, right? How about the argument? They would have had to involve hundreds of people who would have been in on the deception, and there is no way it could have remained a secret for long. Wouldn't somebody have told the truth? This might seem a hard one to tackle, but it is really not that inconceivable. If we start by saying that high up in the national security ladder, because the space race was a matter of national security, high up there must have been relatively few who decided on going for the deception in order to deceive the Soviets. They were, of course, clear about it from the beginning, that in order for anything like this to work, a very limited number of people could know the real deal. So, how many could those few have to inform about the hoax? I will argue, not that many. The people involved in the project would probably simply have been working on an actual space program. Most of the scientists working on the mission, the technicians, the contractors, etc., would have been absolutely unaware of them being manipulated into playing a role in a giant hoax. If I was to work on this deception, I would of course send a rocket into space. That they could do. It would simply be unmanned. Nobody actually saw the astronauts entering the module except on a television screen. So that would not be a problem. Launch a rocket into space and have it evaporate there. That, I think they could easily pull off, without that many really knowing what actually was going on. What the world saw was just a video feed on a television screen. And same goes for most of the individuals in the control room. They were simply fed with data, just as they had been doing for the past months, practicing hundreds of times, in preparation for the actual mission. I know how this works, in a big setting in an organization. The individual focuses on a limited task and has no real oversight. By the time of the actual launch, a very few, if any, could distinguish between reality and an exercise. Or a fake. I already established that the US government had fabricated imagery to use, at least in conjunction with the mission. Rotate the technicians, and in the end no one knows exactly what is pre-recorded and what is live. Even recovering the modules from the sea after re-entering Earth's atmosphere had been practiced over and over again and filmed countless of times. Showing that on television as a live feed would not have been a problem, and the servicemen recovering the astronauts wouldn't even realize that one of their rehearsals was being used as a real event broadcasted on television worldwide. Set it up properly, and very few would need to know about the whole thing being a hoax. Most people involved did not even realize it being a scam at all. Add in the human factor of honest people, educated scientists, being accused of faking a moon landing, and they will be some ferocious attackers of anybody, even hinting at the mission being nothing but a huge show. And those individuals have the intelligence of making any skeptic appear like some tinfoil hat imbecile, and hence adding to the credibility of the event that actually never took place. Those few who knew were obviously sworn to secrecy against the penalty of death, since this was a matter of national security and it would have been absolutely unacceptable, under any circumstances, to reveal the truth. Ever. There are ways of keeping people shut up. Threats, smearing, and bribes. And of course, the hoax being seen as a strategic action in the name of your country, participating in this action, would be regarded as heroism, accepted with honor, since it was designed to deliver a devastating blow to a dangerous enemy, armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. It would probably not have been very hard to convince the right people of taking this secret to the grave for the country. Probably also, some who knew were later annihilated, to conceal the truth, if they were suspected of anything foul. And that would not have been the first time something of that sort happened in history. Those who actually knew the truth would have been the astronauts, some individuals at the highest level of government and some at the top level of NASA and Pentagon. Not that many lower down the hierarchical ladder. I could see it being but a couple of dozen at most. You see folks, I think it would not have been nearly as hard to pull off the deception as it is actually sending a manned spacecraft to the moon. At least deceiving everybody into believing is doable, while I doubt sending a man to the moon is. Especially 50 years ago. There was a clear motive for creating this deception during the Cold War. And I think I have demonstrated how strong the resolution to do whatever it takes can be within the US government to win at any cost. And then, there is the notion. Wouldn't you go for this kind of act if you had the chance to do it? I mean, if they did conceive this gigantic deception. It was certainly a master plan. A gigantic masterpiece. Really not much less of a feat than actually sending a man to the moon.
In less than 5 years, an astronaut will be stepping out on the moon to conduct man's first real exploration of our oldest satellite. It will have been a long voyage, carrying him far from his native land, planet Earth, into a strange and airless world. To survive, he must carry with him a bit of his familiar environment. How bioengineers are designing a spacesuit that will support astronauts on a round-trip lunar mission is our story today on Science Reporter.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.